I'm Dr Manjir and welcome to Hidden Science. Today's edition of Hidden Science is a special featuring the life and works of scientist Harry Oldfield. Harry is a born inventor, and for 30 years he has been revealing previously unseen realms both in the microscopic and the macroscopic levels. His work has garnered international acclaim from many scientific bodies, and he is a holder of an honorary doctorate and has been given the status of honorary professor from universities in both the USA and India, as well as being a fellow of the Royal Microscopy Society of Oxford. He is a regular speaker at international conferences and is the co-author of the book The Dark Side of the Brain, as well as being the subject of a further book, Harry Oldfield's Invisible Universe. Welcome to the show, Harry.
Thank you, Manjir.
Fantastic. Now, you really have been an inventor since a very early age. How is it that your parents sort of encouraged you?
Well, basically it all started in my memory of them talking when I was, say, 2.5, 3 years old. Wow. Now, wasn't with a chemistry set blowing things up. That was later. But it was, I often got sent to my grandmother for babysitting. I actually do think it's very cruel to sit on babies. They tend to change colour if you do that too much to them. But anyway, I survived the babysitting. But she used to tell the story of one day, it was a sunny day, but she had closed the curtains to protect a painting from the sunlight. And I'd been playing in the living room, and suddenly she heard this tapping noise. She came in and saw me tracking a sunbeam that was coming into the room, going back to the window where the chink was, and tapping on the glass quite hard, and then putting my finger in and out of the light. So quite rightly she said, Harold, when I was doing something naughty, it got changed from Harry to Harold, just as a distinction. And she said, what are you doing, darling? And I said, Nana, why is it when that light comes through the glass, it doesn't break the glass? So they saw that I had a kind of a logic and scientific reason, which was sort of almost built in, if you like, to think things out and ask questions.
And you were different from your siblings as well in that case?
My siblings were younger than me, you know, and they're all wonderful in their own right. One's a fantastic gourmet chef, and the other is a PhD in biochemistry, a world consultant. So they encouraged all of us. It wasn't just me. They were very, very democratic when it came to their children.
And am I right in saying you had your first commercially viable invention at 12 years old?
Quite right, yes, indeed. I'd got interested in Artemia salima, which are brine shrimp, for the uninitiated, and what I used to do, I used to put them in salt water, work out even sea water formula, from about 10, 11 years old. But then I would try and raise them, and they would die quite suddenly sometimes. So I was quite sad by this. So I wrote to the company of the suppliers, importers of the eggs, and they told me that there was no commercial process for growing these shrimp out of the wild to full maturity. So what I did, I found out what they were eating in the wild, measured with my microscope micrometer lens and stage micrometer the size of the algae they were eating, and then I wanted to find a substitute, and I found that baker's yeast was a wonderful substitute, same size almost, for the cells, and I grew them to maturity, sent off the whole formula process to the shrimp company, and they sent me back then, 1960s, a cheque as a schoolboy for £100.
Gosh.
You know, and my father was a hard-working London bus driver at the time, and I don't think he'd seen a cheque that big before. So he opened up a bank account for me and deposited it, and that was my first commercial thing.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Yeah. And then you went on to be a school teacher of science, is that right?
That's
You're
right.
known as the Mad Professor.
I was.
Did you blow anything up, Harry?
I did, I'm afraid. A part of a science laboratory window blew up when there was an accident with metal sodium. When you're only supposed to put a snippet, someone had distracted me by a boy had pulled a girl's pigtail or something to that effect. I jerked because she'd screamed, and half the sodium went in the trough, water trough. Had the safety screen up and everything.
Right.
I said, right, you lot, don't panic, but everybody under the table.
No.
So I dived under the table with the rest of the kids. It was all a great laugh, and suddenly there was this bang, and the school laboratory window had been blown out. Luckily, it wasn't playtime. But yeah, and there was a nice huge black mark on the ceiling with a fireball, which I wasn't looking at it, but the boys at the back were describing. It was like an atomic bomb. A mushroom cloud had come up from the water trough that had been smashed to smithereens. I don't do things by halves, you know. And I got my reputation cemented in the psyche of the school.
Health
from
and
then
safety would really allow you nowadays. But
well, health and safety were around even then, but maybe they weren't as strict, I don't know.
So when it came to when you first saw something called Kirlian photography.
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that, and how did you...
It was a life-changing moment.
Yes.
I acquired a book, I think it was a gift actually, from another science teacher, and she'd given me this book called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, authors Ostrander and Schroeder, published by Abacus, still acquired on Amazon, I think. And in there were the first Kirlian pictures, the images of Kirlian photography, which had been done in Russia, and they were the first ones ever seen in the West.
Now, for people who don't know what that is, because it was discussed a few years back, but I mean, do you have any slides of what that
I
looks
have.
like?
Basically, think of it as corona discharge photography, where a high pulsing electromagnetic field, high voltage but low current, is pulsed through a plate. The object, specimens put on the plate, it's earthed, and photographic film is put underneath through a moisture screen, transparent moisture screen, like a plate of dielectric glass, and the image is recorded directly on the film. And that's how these were done in the early years.
And this is all developed in Russia?
Indeed. This is a picture of my thumb with this wonderful energy around it.
So that's a corona that you're speaking
Yeah, corona. And shall we say, some researchers called it the aura. Okay,
Right.
I don't actually use that word, although I have a great deal of respect for it. I've just been lecturing at the College of Psychic Studies in London, and it's a word that is termed and used in the proper way. But it can mean anything. In this case, it's electrical discharge.
Yes, yeah.
And here is the most modern method developed from those times, which is my new energy vision system, which is showing things without the electricity. I'll come to that in a little while.
So you've actually developed that from Kirlian. We'll talk about that
Indeed, from the idea of Kirlian right to the present day.
So this was really a life-changing moment.
It
when
was
you first
indeed.
saw that,
It was literally a quantum leap in the discovery process.
A lot of people nowadays don't hear about this because it's been around for so long. The Kirlian.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Since actually the 1930s, where Semyon and Valentina Kirlian, husband and wife team, discovered the process.
Right.
Now here we have, it's another Kirlian picture, and I was very interested in what insects were doing and what plants were doing. You know, as a biologist and a physicist, I start from basics. And here we have a cabbage white caterpillar, and it's been feeding very nicely for some time on my organically grown cabbage.
Right.
However, the life force was so vibrant, you can't see the shape of the creature. You can now.
Right.
This was after, I hasten to add, a painless injection of potassium cyanide. Don't do this at home, anybody. And I think I also should mention now on your TV program that I do children's parties and weddings and obviously bookings through the TV Society.
Okay, well, we'll bless the caterpillar for
Indeed, and I really was
to
grateful. I
science.
only did it a couple of times just to be sure. But it was like Manjir, seriously, it was like a light bulb of life being blown out, being switched off. And so I knew then that the Kirlian process was showing something of life, energy and life forces.
Right.
Although it's an electrical system
Right.
of recording the image.
So a lot of people would be quite sceptical that when you use words like life force,
Yeah.
that you're actually getting that. So you're basically saying there's an interaction between the electrical field and a relationship between that and the fact that the caterpillar is feeding off organic cabbage.
Yes, indeed, there is a link.
So you're seeing the link. And you've also done pictures, I know in your book you've got lots of pictures of food that's being microwaved. And
that's quite different to organically unprocessed food. For
so
example.
using this type of imaging, you can actually see the difference.
Oh, indeed,
in
and
the
that's what I
electrical
got
field.
first interested in, and it was in connection with those got long memories with Health in a New Age, which was founded by Colonel Marcus McCausland.
Right.
And he gave us donations towards making larger and better Kirlian cameras at the time, because we were very interested in people's health connected with the food intake and the process.
Well,
which is well known now, of course.
We can't go from Kirlian to, without mentioning something called the phantom leaf effect.
Indeed.
I think.
And this is what fascinated you also from the first book, The Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, because in there were the first images of leaves, where the living leaves photographed were
Do you have an image of that?
Yes, I have. Well, that's the before and after. Okay.
There's a cereal that you were talking about.
Indeed, but I can come back to that.
Organic,
but basically, what you need to see is that. And it's a picture of what looks like a whole leaf, but if you were to look very carefully from this point edge onwards to the tip here, there is no physical leaf, absolutely no physical leaf.
Yes.
And we formulated the theory based on research from Russia that it was a subatomic energy matrix on which physical molecules were strung. And this was long before string theory was ever conceived of.
Right. So even though there's nothing physical, you can actually see the imprint there.
Absolutely.
So
here we have an organically grown potato leaflet with all the leaves on the first picture, and then all the leaves stripped off. All there is just a central stem. But all the leaves were there in energy form, but disappeared after a few seconds.
I mean, it's hugely controversial just even this, because it's suggesting that there's something beyond the physical, which is still radical in many circles.
Oh, indeed.
And that there's something beyond the physical, the field, is actually creating the physical and not the other way around.
That's correct. That's what I believe.
Which is still heresy in a lot of circles.
Yeah. Listen, if I was in the Middle Ages, I wouldn't be talking to you now. I'd be well toasted.
Yes.
Or singed round the edges, in my case, because I'm very good at escaping. I mean, if you're talking of fundamental radical science, medicine, man and woman, if you don't mind bringing you in here, is no more than the sum of their parts. What you see is a physical form, it's physical, nothing else. And what we call mind is a psychochemical interaction with synaptic pathways that are giving electrical discharges which form thoughts, patterns and memories and many other things. And when this physical form dies, stops, all the chemical reactions stop, etc., we call that physical death, then there is nothing of that personality, consciousness or anything left.
There's nothing that, so you believe
that? No.
Yeah, that's it.
I'm putting there
sorry.
Very disturbing and wrong theories forward.
Opposite.
You know, I am completely opposite to that.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, we're going to be recorded now on television, and if someone decides on their television, they may do after that remark, who knows, to press the off switch, does that mean I have disappeared?
I think we'll have to press the off switch just for a second now, because we've got to go for a break now. But join us again after the break with more of Harry Oldfield. Welcome Welcome back to Hidden Science. We're here with the scientist and inventor Harry Oldfield. So Harry, one of the things you're probably most famous for is the PIP. Could you explain what that is and how it developed
for maybe Kirlian? Well,
yes.
basically it stands for polycontrast interference photography. When I was trying to develop Kirlian photography in the UK as a research tool, a scientific research tool, there were problems. There was problems that it was only giving a two-dimensional representation of what I knew to be a three-dimensional energy field around living things. So I thought of ways around that. In my first book, with Dark Side of the Brain, I made transparent electrodes that circumnavigated the subject, but you had to use higher voltages. Okay, so to keep things safe, I moved away to other form of thinking. So I put around a lower voltage field, but pulsing at higher frequency. And you could pick up information and see information, but you had to use a device that was hooked up to a oscilloscope or a sound level meter that measured the resonance noise around the subject. This we called ESM, or electroscanning method. So that was an intermediate stage. But I always wanted to get back to the beautiful visuals of Kirlian photography or something similar. And I went back to fundamentals. In the Kirlian, the actual thing that makes the picture is an electron, a subatomic particle to all intents and purposes. So what else could produce luminosity? It was obvious, it was a photon, another subatomic particle. So I thought about how to do this, and basically you've got the three-dimensional energy field, and this was all a hypothesis to begin with. Then it became reality, and as a photon travels in and out of my living energy field, it produces something called, in physics, interference. So watching this photonic interference as it rose and fell. So
it's where, almost like where you could say where light waves are actually crossing. That's the
exactly.
Yes.
For example, to be more technical, where a trough and a trough come together, they increase the light intensity. Where a trough and a peak come together, they decrease it, and everything in between.
Yes. So you actually found a way to actually interpret that and turn that into photography.
That absolutely.
Right.
Something that the eye, except maybe for people with gifts of vision, don't see.
So you're not only picking up things that are like you can actually see the patterns of people's clothing, but you're also picking up things that are not obvious in the physical as well.
Absolutely.
And so that has amazing implications for healing, for example. And I know you've got some slides of...
Absolutely. Well, do you remember the wonderful phantom leaf?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it wasn't a great quantum leap to jump to people. There are people who have lost limbs, but they still feel the sensation of those lost limbs, sometimes pain, sometimes actual term in medicine, phantom limb pain. But that in medicine is a psychochemical illusion of synaptic pathways sending things down the axons and trying to get a signal back from the missing part that's not there.
That's what I was taught in medical school.
Absolutely, it's classical, and you're taught how to control it with painkillers and physio and all sorts of other psychological means.
Acupuncture sometimes.
But I had a subject who wasn't too much in pain, but he had a vivid sensation of his arm. So I said to him, when he had a good sensation of his arm, to come to my healing clinic, as it was then, with electromagnetism and crystals and gemstones that I was also trying to help people with, still do. And here he is, and this is a front, there's the missing arm, clearly on the left. But when the sensations became heightened, that was what we captured.
So just because you actually have the physical stump of the arm there, and then what you can see in the red is a projection
of energy that he was projecting.
Right.
Where like with the leaf,
yes,
the subatomic energy matrix is still there, the precursor of physical form, I believe.
Yeah.
And you know, he was still aware of it. It was still vivid enough to capture.
And you're actually able to pick it up from from my medical school teaching, that's a nonsense.
Of course it is.
You've actually got the photograph to say there is something more there. You know, with conventional instruments, you may not be able to pick it up, but you've invented something that can pick up the light interference and actually interpret it in a way that we can now see it.
Correct.
That's just absolutely
Thank
amazing.
you.
So I want to just say, because you did mention crystals there, and of course everybody might be going, oh, crystals, that's a bit new agey. But you know, this is not only a method of diagnosis, you've also invented a method of treatment as well that works alongside this.
Crystals, gemstones, by the way, for those people that laugh hysterically about people using crystals, let me tell you something. They are using the most geometric order of material matter that you can get. You cannot get more symmetry, more, shall we say, foundation than in a crystal, as far as physical matter is concerned.
They're in amplifier, really. Then,
they're in amplifiers. Around the studio here, you've got silicon technology. Without silicon chips, nothing would work in the modern world.
Yes.
And they're just sizes of silicon dioxide with a certain crystalline, mainly two-dimensional form. We are using three-dimensional natural crystals. And also I'd like to give, please, credit here to Dr Marcel Vogel, who was a man who pointed me in the right direction at a very young age, who was an IBM scientist who invented the liquid crystal we know today that is everywhere. And he was a great friend of mine.
And it's true also, though, that everything that you do, you test. And so you've tested that, the methods that you've developed, and you spent a long time developing.
Very much so.
You know, so you're coming to it from a skeptical, almost like a skeptical point of view from your own work.
I'm open-minded, but I'm not convinced until I see it.
Yes, yeah. And this isn't the sort of thing that people would go into, or a photography in a mind, body, spirit show. It's a different
completely
method.
Different.
Completely different.
Because we can use this under any circumstances in three-dimensional space. Right. Okay, and it's showing the energy around the subject in three dimensions.
Photos to show us at all of the pit, but in terms of its.
Certainly, certainly. This is very interesting. We'll be coming on to the subject a little later, I believe. But this is a spirit form, and it looks like very much a Greek Orthodox priest. And this, I actually took a picture of this energy form against a blank wall in a morgue in Greece.
Right.
But here, for example, this is an energy interaction with my hand with an African violet. And one can see that you've got different interference patterns of energy going right through, and my signature and around me is quite different to the plant, but there is an energy connection that is occurring between me and my plant, just like that old picture of on Michelangelo's ceiling. Not quite.
So there's something beyond the physical finger.
Absolutely, beyond the physical finger. Here we have something that we rediscovered. Chakras in people.
Because you didn't even know what chakras are. You actually discovered them through the pit.
We can see them. Actually, these circles of energy. Now that's a very healthy young woman. Have a look at her. Sorry, I beg your pardon. That's not so healthy.
Right.
That's a gentleman with angina pectoris.
Right, and you're actually picking up
blocked heart chakra.
I mean, anyone can see that doesn't look too
healthy with the red blob in the middle. And here we have a wonderful picture of a Great Dane, and she's actually was diagnosed with hip dysplasia, and she's leaking there from the end of the back leg. Yes. And this is her after on treatment. That tube there is full of special crystals, healing crystals, and we're pulsing them with electromagnetism, and they're vibrating on a piezoelectric level. Yeah. And the energy block disappeared, the energy leak disappeared, and after a few minutes, she jumped off the couch, which she hadn't done in weeks, onto that bad leg.
Now, this is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for bringing this about. But one thing that everybody's going to want to know is, has this been tested in clinical trials? You know, when I first came across this, I went, gosh, can we line up a number of people who've got diabetes, for example, and photograph them and see if there's any commonality between everybody? So has any of this sort of work
shall
been
we
done?
say the open-mindedness in medicine has come from mainland China and India, okay, where such studies were done. In fact, I still hold, technically, visiting professor of medicine status in mainland China, where I trained a number of barefoot doctors to use this system with the crystal and take it into their communities. So in that context, trials were done and experiments. Right. However, one has to remember this method and the crystals are perfect for double-blind trials, but one has to remember that these are very expensive things to do. And, you know, we didn't have that. But you've also got to have the open-mindedness of a physician or a team of physicians that will put their reputation on the line to bring something that's alternative, and this is very alternative, into their scientific visual structure.
Interesting, because although it is alternative, because you're actually talking about things that are
esoteric
this
sciences,
is the beginning,
subtle energy.
I mean, didn't X-rays start off like this? You know,
Radkin, yes, indeed.
Everything that we have moved forward with in science has started off by something, you know, that's revealed something that we haven't known before.
So. Actually, I'd like to mention here that I think that it was Nikola Tesla who was the first inventor of the X-ray.
Oh, we'd love to get you back at some point to talk about Nikola Tesla.
My pleasure. That would be my pleasure.
Thank you so much. So, have you any other sort of examples
of course.
the pit being?
Okay.
Oh,
that's just a before and after A/B comparison.
Oh my goodness.
This is a rather disturbing picture, Manjir, of a crack cocaine addict.
I think we're going to have to come back to that in the next section, because we've got to go to a break now. So join us again for this fascinating discussion with Harry Oldfield. Welcome back to the show. Now, just before the break, Harry, you were about to tell us about this lady,
Indeed,
this pit pictures lady.
This is quite typical of people that abuse certain chemical substances. In this case, it was crack cocaine. Right. And I just want to... It's the top. It's quite... The eyes... Oh, sorry. The eyes are... scary, I know, but look, I want you to pay particular. You remember I mentioned the chakras? Yes. And basically, yes. I want you to look at the crown chakra there, which is the top of the head, and it's actually split open. Yes, right. In energy form, not a physical. Right. And the brow chakra is wide open. Now, normally we associate that with people who are very sensitive and psychic. Okay, right. When I've viewed them. However, this has been done artificially with chemicals. Right. So she's seeing things when she's high on a deranged state, so according to her parents. She also hears voices telling her to do some very unsocial things. And to the side of her, there are actually half faces and figures. Oh, gosh. Okay, and she's against a blank wall. Okay, right. And she's described these figures, what they look like from these other dimensions, and they tell her to do stealing for her habit. And so she's actually inducing a psychosis by her drug use. Absolutely, but you know when they hear the voices, yes, in this psychotic state, I'm saying that these voices are not necessarily internal. They are. The drugs have opened them up. Yes. Uninitiated young people who know nothing about meditation, yoga, 15-year-old, yes. And suddenly they can see things from other dimensions. That's what, for example, in shamanistic societies, ancient societies, these things were in the hands of only the shamans and clever men and women. So that you were opened up slowly. Slowly and guided. Yes. These young people have no guidance into these nether regions, and then they get into trouble, and we have a society that is being plagued because of this chemical connection that happens with the natural energies and mind of people who are abusing these substances.
Yes, yeah, so it's sort of almost forced enlightenment, but in a way that is not
It's
natural.
like being taken, Manjir, as one person described it, to the top of Mount Everest in a helicopter, learning no mountaineering skills, okay, and then told to get down. And that's why they fall and crash and get into terrible stuck.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you could photograph all of that. And I love the story that it was actually a physicist who told you what the chakras were because you were finding them.
Absolutely. I remember it was actually Professor John Hastett from Birkbeck many years ago, 1970s. And he was saying, yes, and you've found certain anomalies on the body. Can you point them out? I said, OK, so I had to stand up at this dinner table. There's one here. There's one here, the molecus here was the bump in this electrical field.
You've not read about these?
No,
you've not read.
And one at the top of the head.
And you purely found this through experimentation?
He said, young man, you should be studying something from the Far East called the chakras, from India to be specific.
Gosh.
And he even recommended what I should be directed to there.
That's amazing that you've, such amazing sort of scientific proof that, you can't say
Professor
scientific
Hastett
proof, but
was a great influence in directing me towards good science.
Now, you've not just used the pip and your filters for in a healing context, have you? You've also photographed sort of landscapes, and I think we got a glimpse of that earlier.
Indeed. Now, this was done with not the... it's still done with the interference, but this is not done with the computer. It's actually an analog filter, okay, that you can put in front of any camera, any webcam, any still camera. And in this case, this is a control picture of what looked like very solid stones at Stonehenge.
Oh, this is actually at Stonehenge, right?
Okay, Stonehenge.
Yeah.
Now, when you put one of our special filters, actually it's got the nickname now, Oldfield filter in cyberspace.
Oh gosh, so...
It's very interesting that the
and
time...
that's not a photoshopped picture or anything?
No, I don't even know, Manjir, how to work Photoshop.
Right.
Never used it,
Okay.
Don't know how to. But basically that is showing that matter as we know it, and you get enough energy into a solid object, it no longer becomes a solid object.
Gosh. So you're actually
when you
found
view it in a special way.
That the frequencies are such that they actually, it's disappeared.
Indeed.
So you can actually see the landscape beyond the stone.
Beyond, yes indeed.
Right, amazing.
Now, it can't happen every time, but it's like almost arranging a meeting, a rendezvous. You have to be in the right place, in the right time, with the right equipment to capture this kind of phenomena.
That's why a lot of this isn't repeatable. So the idea that you have to repeat things for science.
My old professor at uni told me, Harry, my boy, I used to be known as the little renegade in my college and university days. He said, you only need for yourself to see one white crow to prove to yourself that a white crow exists. Yeah. For science, you have to show it 100 times, and you'll be spending the rest of your life doing that. And you may never achieve it.
Yes, that's true.
But here's a white crow of mine in a graveyard. And I heard that this graveyard had a history of haunting. Right. So I went with my camera and my filter, and I saw what looked like a child up ahead on the path in a bed sheet, covered in a bed sheet. Right. I thought someone's been sent here to set me up. And I say, hey kid, take off that silly bed sheet and show yourself, in a jovial way. I took it as a joke. So it turned around and then levitated off the ground. Oh, this is a few yards. And it's midsummer, okay, so it's quite bright, even at 8 o'clock at night. Right. And I suddenly realised I've got the real thing here, so I gave chase, Manjir. And I was younger then, jumping over tombstones and everything. And you know how we British are always polite. I said, excuse me, miss. I didn't even know it was female, but from the shape and the size, I thought it was female. Excuse me, miss. I only want to take a picture. No one's going to believe me
you asked
unless... I said, could you just stand still? I didn't even know if she had legs to stand on. And she turned, because I was so polite, I believe, and draped herself over the tombstone there.
Oh, she's
and,
posing.
you know,
Now, a lot of people won't know, but that shrouded figure, a lot of people used to be buried in shrouds.
In those days.
In those days, yeah.
And we, with historical...
And the mausoleum in the background.
And I said to her to stay where she was, because I changed the aspect ratio of the camera.
Right.
Film camera in them days, you never wanted to waste film, it's too expensive. Yes, the mausoleum in there hadn't been around for 200 years.
Oh, my
it had gone many years before
So if
into a
anyone
ruin.
was to go back into that cemetery, they wouldn't see that.
No,
that was purely
not at all,
on your photo.
not at all. I went
That's
back,
amazing.
tried to find it, and I found out from the caretaker and things that nothing was there, but there had been a record of it.
So you've got a ghost to pose for you. That's fantastic.
Indeed, indeed.
And that's not the only sort of picture like that. You also have something at the Tower of London, I believe.
I have. Here we have, Manjir, the place where commemorates the scaffold of where important executions were done at the time of, say, Henry VIII. If you were a commoner and it was just a normal crime, you were executed at Tower Hill, a little way up the road. But for the royal executions, especially his wives, a scaffold was built. So here I am with my camera and my filter I'm just thinking, what would the scaffold have looked like? I just put it out there, you know, and as I thought that and put the camera to my eye, suddenly you can see where the plaque was. This wooden post appeared straight up.
So that's not actually there?
No, go back. You can see there's nothing there. There was a metal thing, but you can see the height of that, and then look at that in the background there.
Right,
it's almost, you know, it's a structure. And I saw these structures starting to appear, and I thought, well, I've got to get a higher elevation. So I ran across the Tower of London courtyard, and so I didn't want the phenomenon to disappear. I wanted to get high elevation. And I thought, yeah, I have to get to the bloody tower or somewhere like that, you know. And I got to the high elevation, and there you can see this platform that has reconstituted itself at that point. And it was just a question of being in the right place at the right time, and with my consciousness, I believe, asking the right question.
So that's an important part of it. It's an interaction with your consciousness.
And I've always been like this since a kid. In fact, as my mother will probably tell you, I've never really grown up. The appearance is that of a elderly man, but inside I still have the curiosity and heart of a kid with the eyes to look and wonder. And, you know, I think...
That's a true scientist at the end of the day.
Indeed, because you don't worry about criticism. You know, you don't worry about recognition. At the end of the day, what counts is the work. Doesn't happen if it's recognised in this lifetime, as far as I'm concerned. The work is going to be recorded and still there for future generations to reflect back. Oh, look, you know, he saw that, and, you know, and they've got their special glasses now looking around, like the Geordie glasses from Star Trek, looking at a different reality, and are able to switch to different wavelengths to observe other realities and other dimensions at the flick of a switch. Who knows, I might invent that before I decided to leave the Earth plane.
So we could have the new Google glasses here.
For the future.
With Pip.
Yeah, I was
Google
very
glasses.
impressed with those. I don't want to advertise anything, but technology is now moving faster than I would have ever believed. And we can then adopt a certain technology to make our viewing even more accurate and wonderful.
It's just amazing that this isn't more well known, so hopefully today we're going to spread the word a bit more. And
I appreciate that.
I believe after the break we're going to have some more. But you're going to actually show us the PIP machine itself, is that
indeed. Right? It's called NEV now, New Energy Vision. I'm very proud of this new programme because it was written by my son Anthony.
Oh gosh,
Yes,
so you're
indeed.
always moving it forward.
Yeah, the tiny little boy you may have remembered in my clinic many years ago. The little schoolboy running around. He's the creator of this next programme.
Oh, all part of the family then. So.
It is all in the family.
Right, fantastic. So do join us after the break, and we're going to be doing a live demo of Harry's PIP machine. Welcome back, and we're here with Harry Oldfield and the PIP machine. And it's amazing, really, because you've actually got this all hooked up with
Yes,
an ordinary laptop.
Ordinary laptop, and this is a high-resolution webcam,
Right.
and you know, it can be very good for looking at preliminary energy and spotting, shall we say, highlighting energetic conditions.
So we've got a few volunteers in the studio today. So
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
so tell us what it is that you can see here.
Well, let's start. May I ask the young lady's first name?
Penny.
Penny. Penny, you've got, I can see stress coming from your neck down your shoulders, okay? This is something that you have definitely felt an area of discomfort, because I can see your living energy field leaking in this area. There are a few other little things too. You do have reading glasses.
Not yet.
Ah. Have you noticed that your arms are beginning to get not long enough to sometimes see certain fine details?
Yeah, more in the distance, really.
More in the distance, okay. Now you've got to remember the distance I'm looking at this here. So it was only, I will get the eyes tested earlier for a set of reading glasses, or do the Bates method of exercises to avoid the glasses altogether.
All right.
So you're actually picking up things
Just
that
at a glance.
have not actually happened yet, in a way. So
Oh,
you're picking
definitely.
things-
I mean, I've forecast, for example, in homeopathic medicine, and you know I've got a doctorate in homeopathy. There are something called miasms, or shows tendencies that flow through environments, populations, and in families.
So you
We don't actually use the word
Right.
inheritance, but we've got these tendencies.
Right.
So we can indeed pick things up there. I know, for example, have you changed your diet recently?
Yeah, so yes.
Yeah. It's doing you good.
All right.
Okay, doing you good. And again,
How are you picking that up from Penny?
now listen, Manjir, I would love you to be one day guest of honour on one of my training courses.
Oh, wow.
Okay, you have an open invite.
Thank
I might be in India, China, or Africa, but you're welcome. But I do a lot here too. Your name, sir?
John.
John, I've got to ask you, have you been a smoker or a smoker in the past?
No, very, very, very long time ago.
Very long time ago. Then I've got to go back a bit further with you, because I'm seeing a little bit of red energy escaping there from the lungs. And I've got to ask you, did you suffer with bronchitis or asthma as a child? Something that you grew out
Not
the
as far as
tendency
I'm
of?
aware.
Okay. And you haven't been recently to Beijing, where they have the
No.
worst air pollution in the world?
No.
Okay, so I have to say there's a little anomaly there that I'm not quite sure of, but this is a changing pattern there over
Could
the
this be
chest.
emotional? So that if it's... Could,
If it was emotional, it would come mainly from the heart
Right.
chakra as well.
okay.
No, this is something transient, you know, it may be the environment that he's been exposed to, some pollution, when travelling. If you've had a recent, for example, plane ride, even a short one to Europe, they recirculate the air.
Quite a few months ago.
Okay. Did you come back with anything in the chest?
No, not that I can recall.
Okay. It's just that they're hardly, since we smokers like me were ousted for not smoking at the back. I loved an odd cigar, especially Cuban. The back, I did everything wrong. I still do, and they don't change the air filters in the aircraft as much as they used to.
Oh, I
So you're
see.
getting recirculated viruses and bacteria particles and spores. The filter looks physically clean, saves airlines much money, but we smokers, you know, save the general public
you were
so
very
many
sick.
lung infections. You wouldn't believe. Now, I just want to, John, just coming down to your little spot there on your left ankle to you, okay? Okay. Any long, distant injury there? Because it's an echo from the past.
Well, went walking yesterday quite a distance, so it may be that.
Okay, and as I say, the distance walking isn't something you do regularly, John?
Not that regularly. No.
Okay, did you jump over stiles and things like that?
No, but it was up and down hills.
Right, and there you can see that well actually it is also quadruple muscles there on his calves and things. They're also leaking red energy. Okay, there's natural red energy, of course, running through the studio. That's earth energy, even this fire high up.
And the colours, are they an interpretation you've put on this?
No. These filters were developed with me from people with clairvoyant vision that can actually see like this in great detail. But there are other filters, for example, people in the distance there. I may want to get a little bit more detail, and I can swap filters.
This is what you might call the regular view, isn't it?
Regular view, it's the default clairvoyant filter. Now I'm going into a different filter that not only show, but especially shows up things like chakras and things through clothing and what have you here. Okay. Now there's, for example, in John, you can see clearly there a brow chakra.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You couldn't actually see that with the other filter because of the circumstances of the thing. And there is a young man there at the back. Can I ask you, sir, to stand up? What's your first name?
Graham.
Graham. Thank you, Graham. Now, Graham, as I thought, gives a lot out from the heart chakra. Okay. And this also from his brow chakra. He's a creative individual. Okay. Now, can I ask you, are you into music, into art, or anything of that nature? Art. Okay. Okay. But anyway, you had that kind of modality. Okay. I'm not putting people into categories here, but there are certain characteristics, if you use them, and we use them through the chakras and the energy field directed by consciousness, you get kind of fingerprinting. You see the heart chakra there in the middle of his chest there, not the physical heart, it's glowing. Yes. It's glowing, you see, and that comes from an artistic temperament, okay? But it's also someone who can be open to emotion, okay? And is not frightened of speaking his mind or his heart. Okay, and I've never met Graham before, but those of you may be here in the studio that know him, I'll leave it up to you to make up your own minds.
Well, I think the art was spot on, and
and you know, there's no way I've had any kind of previous.
Is there anyone else, or the director? Well, I think the director won't let you get away without doing a scan of me whilst you're here.
Oh my word! How can I say anything about perfection?
Indeed.
There's a gentleman sitting over to the right here. I'm pointing this camera to, and I've got a question to ask you. Have you, sir, ever been in the army or a motorbike rider?
The latter.
The latter, the motorbike rider. My word, congratulations for being still with us on this planet, because, you know, you had a spill where you became very close to death. You're doing things on near-death experiences.
Yes.
My advice, ask that gentleman over there some of his experiences when the ambulance arrived at the scene of his accident and were probably shaking their heads. This guy wasn't going to... Am I right?
It was the accident, the ambulance, that actually hit me.
Oh my God.
Goodness, the ambulance actually...
And I was a fraction from death.
Right. Right.
And you picked that all up?
Oh yeah, at a glance, Manjir. And I can train people. Sorry, I'm very enthusiastic about this. I can train others to do this.
Is that psychic abilities here, or are you picking that up from the pit?
I'm picking up from the information and patterning I've seen thousands of times.
Oh, I see.
I sometimes think I'm psychic after a few drinks, but apart from that, you know, I am just using this skill, and I'd like to think it is a skill of, because I've seen these pictures, I've invented the system, I've been looking at subtle energy for 37 years. Yes, ladies, I did start as a schoolboy. If you believe that, you believe anything. But what's your first name, sir?
My name's Enrico.
Enrico, after this is over, I'd like to shake your hand, and then I'm going to play the lottery. I mean that as a compliment, because
sure you win.
It's only by the grace of God, and I don't use that term lightly, that you are here.
I think the directors and producers would not let you get away without scanning me today.
Understood, Manjir.
So I think we better.
Well, I will ask one question
that,
beforehand.
yes, yeah.
Did you hurt yourself
Did I hurt myself?
when you fell from heaven?
Of course, darling. What do you expect?
And you can tell your James I said that on public TV. Yeah. He should be telling you that.
He does every day.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm an old devil, you know. But thank you. I'm sorry I didn't get round to everybody, but do you want me?
Yeah, do you want to do a scan of myself?
Yeah, okay. You might have to cut some of that out, the bit about you falling from heaven.
Do you want to actually put that back onto that scanner, or should we do that just like this?
I can use it just like this if you so wish, because with I've been now admiring the new multi-spectrum LED spotlights I'm under, and for that this particular filter is better at me discerning things than the other more sensitive clairvoyant filter, you understand.
Okay.
I'm just going to show, for example, meridians that are travelling down your arm, and they're very, very nice and clean and excellent. But there is sign of Manjir fatigue. Okay, now no one would ever guess that from looking at you, but you don't half burn the midnight oil, dear. I can actually put my reputation on the line and say that you didn't get to bed last night till the early hours of the morning.
Not before.
Okay.
Scripting.
Okay. Manjir, your left eye, it could be because of all the scripting and what you've been doing on the computer, but your left eye is under more strain and stress than the right eye. Are you aware of that?
I need to change my glasses.
Right.
Yes,
prescription change.
I need to change my prescription.
Okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Lovely. Heart, absolutely fantastic and strong energy. Okay. But there is a little glow from the teeth area. Okay, there's a filling or a tooth that had been, shall we say, looked at before and had been seen to, but the energy is beginning to leak a little bit more.
Oh, right.
Then, so a little check up on that tooth. It's back second molar there in, and you might need a little check up on that. Okay. But otherwise, a little bit of cold feet.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in a wet set. Sometimes physically cold feet, and that always responds to exercise and getting out and moving.
Pretty much clean bill of health there. So
I would say so, and I'm speaking to a medically qualified doctor, I know.
This is amazing. I wish I had this when I was doing medicine, I'll tell you that. But thank you very much for coming on the show, Harry, and thank you to our audience today. We don't normally have such an amazing audience, so for being good sports and volunteering. You've been an absolutely fantastic guest today. Thank you, Harry, so much.
It's been a pleasure. So
this has been a Hidden Science special on the life and works of Harry Oldfield. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon for some more science from the cutting edge. Goodbye.